Some are a real small crowd today, but that's great. I've heard over the years a lot of homilies, so many homilies on this gospel that basically comes down to commending Peter and giving Peter 5 gold stars for getting out of the boat and at least trying to walk on the water. The problem, as most homilists will tell you, is that he takes his eyes off of Jesus and his faith is shaken, but in the end Jesus is there to rescue him, to grab him out of the water. We are asked to be courageous, get out of the boat, but keep our eyes on the Lord Jesus. It may be good encouragement for some people to put their faith into action, but it kind of misses the point. It totally misses the point of the gospel story today, I have to say, and I preached on this before. After all, when they get back into the boat, the other disciples don't congratulate Peter, give him a high five for almost walking on the water or almost doing a little bit well. The real focal point of the story is Jesus, whom the disciples accept finally as the Son of God. Not only acknowledgement, but they worship Jesus as the Son of God. This is a big change in their worldview of Jesus. They finally, after all this time, started to connect all the dots from the many miracles and signs and wonders to finally acknowledge Jesus for who he is, the Son of God. If you took Bible study last year and this spring, we studied Matthew. We also saw another boating account of Jesus in chapter 8. In chapter 8, there's a great storm and the wind is going and the waves start coming into the boat and the disciples fear and are really in dread for their life as Jesus is taking a nap at the back of the boat. I love that. I love that whole thing. Jesus is not worried about anything. He's just taking a nap while the boat is just taking on water and getting wild and the seas are up in fury. Finally, waking up, they cry, "Lord, save us," the disciples. Jesus reacts by telling them, "Oh, ye of little faith." He then swiftly rebukes the wind and sea and brings about the calm and the peace and order to their lives that only Jesus can do. And they say to each other, even the winds and the sea obey him. Something's really different about this guy. Everybody they know can do something like this so powerfully. Someone who can command and control nature. So we have 2 different boat stories in Matthew. If we contrast them, if we put them side by side, we have wind and waves, but no storm in today's gospel. And the disciples in today's gospel are not fearing for their lives, really. What causes them to be afraid, what would cause me to be afraid, hopefully what would cause you to be afraid, is they see a ghost. Can you imagine being out on the Watapa Pond or out in the bay here, and all of a sudden you see somebody, a ghost, walking on the water? You'd be afraid. I think I would be, unless you was on one of those surfboards. But they are afraid. They're terrified today in today's gospel. Not so much about the wind and the waves, but finally, Peter sees Jesus and he tells him, he throws a challenge out. If it's you, let me walk out to you. Let me try to walk on the water. And Peter does for all of about 3 seconds. And he sinks. And Jesus says to him, "You of little faith." The wind simply stops completely all at once, and Jesus climbs into the boat. And this time the disciples worship him as the Son of God. The disciples' fear is more reasonable, I think, the second time seeing that ghost. It would be for me. Jesus is not with them, remember, the second time. He's off praying. and the ghost they see is beyond anything that they have ever experienced in their whole lives. And one large difference in today's gospel is Peter's request for Jesus to identify himself by allowing him to walk out on the water with Jesus. Jesus grants Peter's request. He says, all right, come out. There should be no surprise in the matter that things are not going to end well for Peter. They never seem to. First, Peter realizes people are not intended to walk on water. And if we try, we'll find ourselves in deep water over our heads and unable to save ourselves. And secondly, Peter knows that we all need to do when we are caught in situations like this, sinking fast like a rock, thrashing about. Lord, save me. In our two gospel accounts, Jesus demonstrates that he is Lord of the wind and the waves and the sea. Quite appropriately then, we also notice that at the end of the second boat account, we read in today's gospel, instead of just wondering what sort of person Jesus is, the disciples finally start worshiping him as the Son of God. The next time we see Matthew record the disciples worshiping Jesus is when he appears after his resurrection. It seems then that Peter's question is not whether one should walk on the sea, but whether that person is Jesus Christ himself. This incident in today's gospel does not necessarily prove that Jesus is the Son of God just because he can walk on water. After all, the disciples first thought he was a ghost. And Peter himself walked on the water for a few seconds. When you start adding all the pieces together, however, it is part of the whole picture that confirms Jesus' identity to those disciples and to us today. It also confirms that Peter is not the Son of God, and neither are we. Only Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus ends up in the boat with the disciples in today's gospel. He jumps right into the boat. A ship and an anchor was always the real earliest symbols for Christians. The boat saving them, the anchor holding them steady. These were the earliest symbols for Christianity. And our story today indicates why it was attractive to the early Christians. Safety and salvation are experienced in the church with Jesus in their midst, with Jesus in the boat. But remember that a ship is not a static symbol. Well, it usually is not a static symbol unless you own a boat like Michael and I, and it stays in port constantly. But it's supposed to be a vehicle used to get somewhere. Ultimately, we may ask, why did Jesus and the disciples cross the sea? Why did they go? The answer is given in chapter 14. They wanted to get to the other side to minister to those people who were there. So, leave the walking on the water to Jesus. That ship, which is the church, is where we want to be. And he can provide the way for us to get to other places so that the disciples of the Son of God can be moving throughout the land, preaching the gospel to all people, no matter where they are.